mess to another for the last 130 years by the and I'm telling you, it's a fascinating subject. We have been led from one nasty mess to another for the last 130 years by the deep state people that basically want to get rid of the United States as a sovereign republic and meld us into the New World Order. And this is how they do it. They get us caught up in wars. They get us caught up in things. It's a way to reduce population. It's a way to profit because the military-industrial complex always profits. We're going to be talking about that with Richard Gage. Richard is a San Francisco Bay Area architect. He's a member of the American Institute of Architects and founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Richard is a 30-year experienced architect, and he's worked with all kinds of structural steel and all types of different structures. He got involved when he watched a little bit of a video about that David Ray Griffin put out on, well, I guess it was on the radio in 2006, and he was talking about what happened at 9/11, and Richard, being a very, very experienced architect himself, understanding concrete and steel structures, the way they are designed to resist fire, and certainly high-rise buildings to resist just about anything, it made him start to do his own research, and he looked into the World Trade Center buildings and Building 7, and boy howdy, it's been a deep rabbit hole ever since. Richard is an amazing guy. He started his own independent organization called Richard Gage 9/11 because, and I'm going to, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it, because Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth felt like he needed to back off on certain subjects that he wasn't ready to back off on. So he just decided to do his own thing, and he's doing that now, and thank God he is, because this gentleman is exposing a lot of other truths as well. And today we're going to be talking about false flag events and how 9/11 and Gaza are very, very similar in their various aspects. And he's going to be doing this presentation a little bit more abbreviated, but this presentation at the Red Pill Expo coming up in a week and a half in Rapid City, South Dakota. So with all that said, Richard, I apologize for sometimes not getting everything right. I went back and I grabbed one of the old bios and pictures off the previous programs, and being short on staff like everybody else in the freedom movement, I ended up kind of glossing over it. I apologize, but you're a terrific friend. You've done marvelous work. I've known you now for, oh Lord, I think I first met you in 2008. So it's been a long time. We've been friends a long time, and I have to tell you, you're one of the outstanding people in the freedom movement. Richard, welcome to the program.
You're very kind to me. You're very, very kind to me, Dan. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Awesome. I realize that you can't see me, and my apologies for that. My camera just died, and while we were fumbling around, I got my old camera up here, and it's not working. But the good news is I should be able to share my screen with you and walk you through these slides. That's Richard, my theory.
To say something to you, you cannot imagine the number of people right now that are having all kinds of different issues with their computers, and it seems to be really, really prevalent in our particular part of the movement.
Yeah, it was just really curious.
Well, Richard, welcome to the show here again. This is Thumper.
Hi, Thumper.
How you doing, buddy?
Good to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you.
I can see you.
I just had to rebuild my broadcast computer on Sunday because all of a sudden it went boom, and it's a brand new. It's a really very good Mac Studio computer, and it's only been in use for less than 6 months, and something went wacky on it, and I ended up having to wipe the hard drive and reload everything. That's how I spent my Sunday. So yeah, welcome to live broadcast and the computer issues that go with.
Yeah, it's amazing, but we're going to have this kind of, and I guess this is why we need to be adaptable. We need to be working on this stuff. Richard, your subject, we did this 3 months ago. There we are. Gotcha. We did this 3 months ago. We started down this rabbit hole. We were talking about 9/11, the COVID pandemic, and Gaza, and how all these things have very, very interesting connections. And you were still in the process putting together the program for how Gaza and 9/11 are connected. Now you're done with it. You're ready to go with this. I can't wait to see your presentation.
Well, me too, because I've been working feverishly on it. So let's share this screen.
Okay.
And that's the one.
And before we do it, while you're doing that, I'm going to just make the statement. For those of us who, those in our audience that are either pro or anti or whatever, this is not intended as any kind of an indictment of a culture or a religion or anything else. This is strictly a scientific research about what happened on 9/11, the false flags that we see, and how those same false flags have been happening in other events around the world.
Oh, it's true. We're looking at the parallels here, but in looking for them and finding so many of them, I have to tell you, Dan, I've moved mountains of my own limited and non-understanding on these issues, COVID and Gaza in particular. So you might have as well. Let me get this screen up. I can't talk and think at the same time, apparently.
Okay. Yeah, well, Richard, I think we've all had various times of epiphany, and I applaud you because you're such a brilliant individual. You're a very, very talented architect. And guess what? That rabbit hole, once you get your head in it, it's amazing how quick it sucks you in.
Yeah, it's so true. And it takes a lot of courage to look at these facts. So I'm going to double down on your admonishment to put on the receptive hat as we look at these parallels and ask ourselves some questions and try to be open to some of the answers. I don't have all of them, certainly. I'm lucky to have the few that I've found. I'm asking a question here. At the conclusion of my research, I discovered maybe the Israeli government, with its own 9/11 moment, has betrayed its own people, as well as the Palestinians. That's a question, because we know our government in the U.S. has betrayed us with regard to our 9/11. So these two events forced radical changes in our society, politically, economically, and geopolitically. So they deserve a second look. We have to ask the question, were these changes intended outcomes In other words, were these events engineered in advance for these changes? So we have to look for patterns, we connect dots, we ask questions fearlessly. What always follows these types of events? Well, there is a common denominator: war. So war has a trigger. What triggers war? False flag events typically trigger war. What's a false flag event? A political or military action that's made to appear to have been carried out by a group that is not actually responsible. Okay, that's just right out of the dictionary. This is a mainstream word. Conspiracy theorists didn't make up this word. State crimes against democracy is a special category. In contrast to conspiracy theories, which speculate about each suspicious event in isolation, the SCAD construct delineates a general category of criminality and calls for crimes that fit this category to be examined comparatively. SCADs often appear where presidential politics and foreign policy intersect. SCADs differ from earlier forms of political corruption in that they frequently involve political, military, and or economic elites at the very highest levels of the social and political order. Do the events of 9/11 and Gaza share any of these SCAD features, state crimes against democracy? Well, let's see what they are. They create the original problem. We're going to be looking at parallels today between these two specific events. So we'll look at previously established geostrategic goals, coveting the natural resources of the target territory. Another element of a SCAD, parallel 2, a rich history of historic and recent provocations and false flag operations. Parallel 3, politically useful, controlled patsies. We'll be looking at all of these today. 4, a triggering event, an innovative attack with dubious origins, a manufactured invasion from foreign operatives, a catastrophic intelligence failure, a military stand down with an obvious uncharacteristic delay in response, foreknowledge of the attacks, uncontrolled delight during the attacks, i.e., in this case, we have in each case dancing Israelis, which is very interesting. They manage the public reaction. That's what they do. First, they create the problem, then they manage the public reaction with this set of parallels. Government and media propaganda with outrageous slogans to manipulate public emotion, involving crisis actors often. Atrocities alleged to the enemy with ensuing dehumanization of them. Denial of such atrocities by the enemy. Opposition, media, and journalists are targeted. Okay, so after managing the reaction, they offer the prescribed solution, their solution. So the military revenge attack is often ready to go. This is a war trigger. So they're ready to pounce on the object. Prepared in advance with no investigation. We'll investigate later, right? Occupy the territory of the new enemy. This is the land grab. They widen the conflict. Why? To achieve their original broader goals and effect regime change of the enemy leadership. They enact a forever war policy. Billions of dollars flow to the media, the banking, and the war industries. There's an extreme censorship of the public by government, mainstream media, and social media more than before. Draconian policies and surveillance is instituted by the government, put in place to control us. One of the original goals, typically also of false flag operations. Malevolent roots we'll be looking at next time, more than 250 years old. So these are not coming out of current administrations or even the past dozens of administrations. These problems, these opportunities have been exploited for hundreds of years, and yes, even much, much longer than that. So let's look and see if we have any of these problems. In order to achieve the previously established goals, the powers that be create conditions so frightful to people, raising the specter of an enemy capable of great harm to the populace, provide exhaustive news coverage so the entire nation can see and tremble, that the abandonment of personal liberties and national sovereignty will appear as a reasonable price to pay to end the violence and return to tranquility and peace. This comes right out of G. Edward Griffin's presentations a long time ago, 40 years ago. So even false flag is defined by Wikipedia. Okay, it's an act, as we mentioned, committed with the intent of disguising the actual source and placing blame on others. There's many examples they provide: the Russo-Swedish War, Franco-Prussian War, the Second Sino-Japanese War, the Winter War. These were started with precipitating events like this. World War II was certainly started with the Gleiwitz incident. Operation Northwoods, another false flag event where airliners were designed to be painted a color of a civilian aircraft and then downed on purpose and blamed, in that case, on Cuba as an excuse to invade Cuba. During the Bay of Pigs incident was a fallout from these types of plannings. The Russian invasion of the Ukraine with the 2014 coup planned by the U.S., Operation TP Ajax, Operation Susanna. There's a bunch of them. The history is very, very rich. The London bombings of 7/7 and the 9/11 itself we'll be talking a lot about today. The Achille Lauro hijacking, a false flag operation. Operation Gladio throughout Europe with stay-behind forces. So the list, unfortunately, is endless. The deception of people all around the world. The JFK assassination, very obvious to those of us who are in any of the truth movements. And we'll talk about some of these others in a moment, too. So what we have is a goal that's trying to be accomplished here, right? And one of them is coveting the natural resources of a target territory. In the case of 9/11, we had the Project for a New American Century posting on their website before 9/11 their goals. What were they? A regional hegemony in the Middle East, a vast increase in the military budget. These gentlemen developed and signed this document a year before 9/11 or so. And interestingly, rebuilding America's defenses, they called for a top line increase of $75 billion to $100 billion in increase in the Pentagon budget. But they said, absent a catalyzing and catastrophic event like a new Pearl Harbor, another false flag, type of false flag operation, by the way, this process will likely be a long one. So without that trigger, they can't get these goals going. Now, of the 25 people who signed this document, 10 of them, neocons, were brought in with Cheney and Bush into power when he came into power. So this is a revolution, if you will, in our politics in this country. And they came in with a load of goals. In fact, Bush wrote in his diary that night, "Today we had our new Pearl Harbor."
Mm-hmm.
And so they got what they needed as a result of what? The attacks of 9/11 and the devastating consequences. So what was another goal? Were there goals in Afghanistan? Well, there was a plan. The day before 9/11, the plan was approved to attack the Taliban. Well, wait, I thought we attacked the Taliban because they were harboring a terrorist, Osama bin Laden. Well, there must have been other reasons. And in fact, as has been documented again and again, as if it's just glossed over, it's just and swept under the rug for the most part. But why would we be in Afghanistan if it weren't for Osama bin Laden? Well, turns out that there's a huge profit motive in Afghanistan with the empire of drugs. In fact, it took the most sophisticated intelligence system in the world more than a decade to find Osama bin Laden. We were busy throwing out the Taliban so that, in fact, these resources could be coveted. What's so special about these resources? They netted $400 to $500 billion before 9/11, exceeding the profits of all the oil companies put together. In fact, Afghanistan exported 3,300 metric tons per year. This is before the Taliban came into power, by the way. After they came in, they shut down the poppy production to just 185 metric tons, a decrease of 94%. Well, this was a problem for those who were making the 400 to 500 billion. So what happened under the pretext of going after Osama bin Laden, we removed the Taliban from power, along with its restrictions on opium production, by the way, and the yield skyrocketed back to 3,400 metric tons in the first 2 years, and then skyrocketed to 6,100 metric tons by 2006. So you can get a sense of how money really comes into play with some of these wars, particularly resources like this. After we were forced out of Afghanistan after 14 years, something else happened. The Taliban got back into power. What did they do when they came back in? They shut down the opium production by 95%. And you can see those by the color-coded charts. The opium production is in purple on the left. In purple, and it's just shut down drastically between 2022 and 2023 particularly. So is there any other resources that Afghanistan has? Well, interestingly, they found themselves in quite a pinch. Geostrategically speaking, the countries to the north became rich from new gas discoveries. The countries to the south were starved for that natural gas, and this put them right in the middle. So they actually signed agreements with Unocal in Turkmenistan to build 36-inch gas and oil pipelines right through Afghanistan. So this was all going well, and because it eventually would extend down to India with hundreds of millions of energy-starved people. But this required these agreements with the Taliban, which were signed in 1998 and allowed the pipeline to pass through their country. But there were serious delays on the part of Unocal, and they negotiated, so therefore, Afghanistan, the Taliban, a new deal with Pakistan and Turkmenistan, excluding the U.S. oil companies. Well, you don't do that. So we placed sanctions on them. And in a final meeting with them, in a meeting Richard Armitage delivered an ultimatum: either you accept our offer of a carpet of gold, or we will bury you under a carpet of bombs. And I guess that's what they selected, because that is exactly what they got. On 9/11, Osama bin Laden was blamed. That the Taliban said, "Gosh, we don't think he did it, but if you want to show us proof of his guilt, we'll turn him over." That wasn't good enough. We know he's guilty. Just turn him over. There's nothing to negotiate about. They're harboring a terrorist, and they need to turn him over. Spoken like a true academic, not. Well, let's listen to Cheney's admission of our knowing that he was guilty in 2006.
So we've never made the case or argued the case that somehow Osama bin Laden was directly involved in 9/11. That evidence has never been forthcoming.
Did you hear that loud and clear? I just wanted to make... What? Did you hear that loud and clear? Oh, okay.
Loud and clear, yeah.
Okay. It gets interesting because let's look at Iraq. Why did we go to war with Saddam Hussein? Because he had weapons of mass destruction? Turns out not. Ties to Osama bin Laden? Another lie. What else could it have been? Well, Iraq, interestingly, after our occupation of Afghanistan on the right side of what? Iran. Iraq would put us virtually surrounding Iran. And that was yet another strategic goal, to control, or, as we'll find out, take over Iran. So it's a focal point for regional and international security issues in the Middle East, certainly. 9/11 afforded the opportunity to surround Iran here. But how could we finger Saddam Hussein and blame him? Well, he's an evil dictator. That didn't go over far enough. Could he be fingered for 9/11? Not very well, but well enough to force a coalition together. And the war was fought then not only for geostrategic interest, but oil, 140 billion barrels of it, the world's second largest proven reserves, 110 trillion cubic feet of natural gas also. The CNN in 2013 said before the 2003 invasion, Iraq's domestic oil industry was fully nationalized by Saddam for the Iraqi people and closed to Western oil companies. A decade later, after the war, it's largely privatized and utterly dominated by foreign firms. So why are we in Iraq? Did we get what we needed? Apparently. Let's look on the Israel side, the Gaza side of this equation as we examine the parallels. Are there some interesting parallels in Gaza that could open our eyes to a greater understanding of why there would be such a need for such great devastation and destruction going on over there? Well, let's take a look back in history. First of all, we have Palestine, from the 14th century to the 20th century. Actually, people, primarily Muslims and Christians, and a 2% Jewish population is all they had at the time. They got along relatively well during that time. The Ottoman Empire fell with World War I, and the British mandate for Palestine is what became the controlling power. In other words, a colony of the king. The growing desire for a national homeland for Jewish people developed during this time, and especially in the early 19th century, 20th century. Tens of thousands of Jews emigrating to the area of creating some violent conflicts. And we have a growing desire also for this national homeland. And the Jewish political activist Theodor Herzl from 1860 to 1904 is credited as the father of modern Zionism. We'll find out why. And he influenced many Jews to emigrate to Palestine, promoting a Jewish state. What did he say or write? We must expropriate gently the private property on the state assigned to us. We shall try to spirit the penniless population across the border, i.e. into Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, by procuring employment for it in the transit countries, while denying it employment in our country. So right from the beginning, there seems to be quite the agenda, not just with regard to people in the territory they were interested in, but the size of that territory as it began to expand. In fact, that statement and many similar statements by Zionist leaders make it readily apparent that the transfer of the Palestinian Arab population, along with accompanying apartheid policy in effect today, seemed to be inherent in Zionism from its inception. But there were greater territorial ambitions of the Zionists. According to Herzl himself, the father of Jewish Zionism here, the area of the Jewish state stretches from the Brook of Egypt to the Euphrates. And this is that area outlined in red, which encompasses problematically many other surrounding portions of many other surrounding nations, including Egypt, Saudi Arabia, all of Jordan, a good portion of Syria, all of Lebanon. It's a problem for, as you can imagine, for the occupants of those countries. Well, 1917, we have an increase of about 11%, from 2% to 11%. And by 1945, the Jewish population comprised 30% of the overall population of this Palestine mandate of the British. So there was an increasing pressure from the Zionist Congress created in the late 1800s upon the monarchy to develop a homeland for the Jewish people. And they promised this in 1917 in return for what? To pull some heavy strings to bring America into England's losing war with Germany. This was World War I. And this was ultimately accomplished through the sinking of the Lusitania, yet another false flag operation, primarily the primary cause of the manipulation of the American people to support this war. So we have, this created huge problems because, as you can imagine, this letter from Balfour on behalf of the monarchy promised one country, which was not theirs, to another people, which was this land that they're simply in control of at this time. And it became a problem for them, as you can imagine, with all this violence and series of false flag operations against the British by the Jewish population, very well documented. But in the letter, he says, nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. So we're promising you this land, but you can't make an even bigger problem for us than you already have. Well, Lord Rothschild was admitted that his family actually created Israel by all this pressure and promises and deals, a lot of backroom deals. So it did create quite a potent reaction. So Britain had no more moral or legal right to promise Palestine to the Jews as a national home. One writer writes, the absurdity in denying the national rights to 90% at the time, 1917, majority, granting it to the 10% minority. One nation, again, Britain, promised the country of another people, the Palestinians, to a third people, the Jews. And one of the most improbable political documents of all time, writes Jewish author Arthur Kessler. It's 67 words long, yet it launched what is broadly seen today as the world's most intractable conflict. And it got even worse. In 1946, you can see that primarily Arabs lived and controlled Palestine. Well, they didn't control it. Other than the British mandate, like we were controlled by the Brits until 1976. So, and then...
and incidentally, Richard, I want to make this statement too. It wasn't that the British had historically had control of this area. As a matter of fact, it was because of the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the defeat of the Turks during World War I that they retained control of this whole area. And as a matter of fact, between the British and the French, they literally restructured the entire national borders and even the names of nations throughout the Middle East as a result of the loss of that area by the Ottomans.
Mm. Yes, and it was just nasty. Up until 1940, or between 1947 and 49, we have 530 villages being destroyed. These are Palestinian villages destroyed by Jewish people, with several different massacres, as you can see, each of which in turn are often instigated by a false flag operation. 1947, something special happened. All of a sudden, the Jewish controlled areas are half of the area. How did that happen? The UN plan, which was not a legal document, but a plan. So how did that plan come into effect? Through war and violence. Until you get to 1967, we have the Six-Day War yet again, where even more territory was consumed and controlled. And then, of course, even today, we have overwhelming control of the area. And this is, if the UN plan was legal, then the occupation of those territories of the 1947 plan, indicated in yellow, are illegal. And so Israel's trying to have it both ways here. They can't get around the occupying another person's land is illegal by definition. And it's become a problem, obviously a huge problem. And this greater Israel is no small part of it. Constitutes the cornerstone of powerful Zionist factions within the current Netanyahu government, the Likud party, as well as within the Israeli military and intelligence establishment. This is a problem. What we're told is that, this is a historical aberration by original lofty idealists. No, we'll see that it carries through. In fact, in 1982, the Yinon Plan is the continuation of what? Britain's colonial design in the Middle East. And we can look at it. It's an Israeli strategic plan to ensure Israeli regional superiority, insists and stipulates that Israel must reconfigure its geopolitical environment through the balkanization of what? The surrounding Arab states into smaller and weaker states. And guess what? This has been acted upon and the plan has been enacted. That's really quite bold and has caused no end of animosity and conflict from the neighboring states, as you can imagine. Israeli strategists have called for the division of Iraq, for instance, into a Kurdish state and 2 Arab states. What if we called for the division of Mexico? Because it would benefit our interests, into eastern and western Mexico. I mean, how would they feel? One for the Shiite Muslims and the other for the Sunni Muslims. Not that there's not some logic perhaps there, but it is not ours to meddle with, or theirs. The first step towards establishing this was a war between who? Iraq and Iran, which happened. And the Yinon Plan and the meddling Mossad, in no small measure, helped that happen. Along with the U.S., of course, divided Lebanon, they wanted to divide Egypt, and they wanted to divide Syria. Disillusion in North Africa, and forecast it as starting from this disillusion from Egypt and then spilling over into Sudan and Libya and the rest of the region. It's a grand vision, which they had some capabilities given our close ties with the U.S. imperial state and its vast military and economic resources. We call the 2001 Wesley Clark revelation. Actually, we're going to be looking at this very carefully. The takedown of 7 countries in 5 years. We'll come back to that. But he's gone into the Pentagon after he's retired. And his old commander or somebody he worked with had said, I just came from the top office. You're going to take out not just Afghanistan, but Iraq. This is like 2 weeks after 9/11 he hears this. And then it gets worse. They're going to take out Libya, Syria, Iran, Lebanon, and Sudan. I think Yemen is in that list also. Let's see. This is so what are those countries that Donald Rumsfeld has announced the policy to take out? They are among these countries in the ambitions of the greater Israel. What did David Ben-Gurion, former prime minister of Israel, say? He was in from 1949 to 54. We will expel the Arabs and take their place. In each attack, a decisive blow should be struck, resulting in the destruction of homes and the expulsion of the population. Well, this is just a letter to his son. Maybe he didn't mean it.
That was in 1937, too. That was before the state of Israel even existed.
Thank you for noticing that. Mm-hmm. And so this is a policy which he, as you'll watch his set of false flag operations and when he was in power between 49 and 54, he enacted. Golda Meir, prime minister, 69 to 74. There's no such thing as a Palestinian people. It's not as if we came and threw them out and took their country. They didn't exist. Yeah, to understand the current conflict, you have to understand the mindset of the people in charge. As I'm suggesting, the Jewish people have been manipulated for a long, long time, like we have in this country by our government. What was the founding document of the Likud party establishing in 1977? Security and peace? Okay, how do they do that? Therefore, Judea and Samaria, i.e. the West Bank areas, will not be handed to any foreign administration. Between the sea and the Jordan, there will only be Israeli sovereignty. Wait a minute, I thought we couldn't say that from the sea to the river. So this was the slogan of the Likud party, and obviously remains its goal because that's what's happening. It's part of a normal Israeli discourse to call for Gaza to be flat, erased, or destroyed. The Nation magazine cites, it's time to confront Israel's version of from the river to the sea. The newspaper quoted an IDF general as having proclaimed, Gaza will become a place where no human being can exist. These statements are not being made by isolated extremists, but by senior members of Israeli government. They really have to be dealt with. Like this one from the finance minister, Smotrich, giving a presentation in Paris and using what as an image on the podium that he's speaking behind. So why is that a problem? Same reason it's always been a problem, and it continues to be a problem. This is in modern times. What year was that? March of 2023, last year. So this is the finance minister for Israel. The greater Israel appears not to be. So we have other goals that Israel has in Gaza that they didn't even know about over the last 75 years. Well, about 10 years ago, they found offshore natural gas assets. Where? 122 trillion cubic feet discovered 2 decades ago, 71 billion in oil. Also, up to 453 billion in profit. I'll show you where this oil and gas was found, especially in the wake of the U.S.-sponsored sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline. Because now, if Israel can develop this oil and gas immediately offshore of Gaza, they can then export it to Europe, starved for gas and energy, especially since Nord Stream was taken out. Maybe that's why Nord Stream was taken out. Everything plays together. The ongoing Israeli aggression against the Gaza Strip cannot be viewed in isolation, says this writer, Tara Alamy, from the rich natural gas resources that abound on its shores. In fact, the energy minister says the memorandum of understanding will enable Israel for the first time to export Israeli natural gas to Europe. And it's even more impressive looking at the significant set of agreements we signed over the last year, which position Israel and the Israeli energy and water sectors as a key global player. So at first they thought they were the only country in the Arab-dominated Middle East that was left without the oil that the others had. And now it turns out they've got it. But where is it? Immediately offshore of Gaza. That's a problem. They don't own it. The Palestinian people, but they're controlling, have been denied the benefits of using this natural resource to finance socioeconomic development and meet their need for energy. The accumulated losses as a result of them being kept from developing this natural resource of theirs are estimated in the billions of dollars, says Atif Kabersi. So this is pretty darning interesting. This is not only contrary to international law, but in violation of natural justice and moral law, denying a country or a group of people who have the greatest last from the 14th century to the current times anyway, the domination of that land. But Israel has now started selling exploration rights to fossil fuels which belong to the Palestinians. Within days of October 7th, in fact, they had sold 12 licenses to 6 different international companies. They're selling licenses to exploit Gazan gas to international companies. The United Nations issued a stunning report on this subject. The economic costs of the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian people, the unrealized oil and natural gas potential. The total oil and gas reserves were valued at a staggering $500 billion back in 2019, before Nord Stream was destroyed. But Israel does not have sole legitimate legal entitlement to the $525 billion, according to this UN report. Or another UN report published in the same year. In 2019, when the European governments and Israel decided on the $6 billion East Med pipeline project, I'll show you where that goes in a moment. Given the location of the gas fields down south, offshore of Gaza, one can understand why Israel would prefer to route the future Ben Gurion Canal, which we'll also come to here, through Gaza to meet up directly with the gas field development. This will make sense in a minute. Outright confiscation with the complicity of Egypt is the outcry here in this article, and I'll monitor. The occupation of Gaza is intent upon confiscating Palestine's maritime gas reserves starting in early 2024, as outlined in the secret bilateral agreement between who? Egypt and Israel. Egypt is in on the game, they're saying. They're not the best friends of the Palestinians. It's very interesting. Cairo is complicit with total disregard. It's a criminal undertaking, says this group. Well, here is the location of the East Med pipeline. Where does it go? From Israel to other Mediterranean countries, Italy, Greece, Cyprus, and even on up toward Europe. Well, the only resources that are available there are the ones in offshore of Gaza. Which brings us to the Suez Canal and its new competitor, the Ben Gurion Canal. The Suez Canal routes 30% of the world's trade through it. And it's aging, it's expensive to maintain. It is through a country that Israel doesn't control. In fact, Egypt wouldn't let Israeli ships through that during the toughest times when they were warring. So they began to develop this plan for the Ben Gurion Canal, named after David Ben Gurion, their former prime minister. So it's going to be a third of the length longer than the Suez Canal, 2 times the depth, though, and bi-directional traffic. So the ships have to line up one way through the Suez Canal. And that's a huge loss of time as you can imagine, ships waiting to go the other way. So this is a huge undertaking. They're trying to get back 20% of that overall 30% shipping could go through the Ben Gurion Canal. It would net Israel about $6 billion annually, twice the U.S. annual aid, by the way, that we provide them. Major Western investors would reap even greater profits because they fund it and they make the most money. International economist Oxford Professor Kersey also suggests the land of Gaza now becomes 3 to 4 times more valuable than in recent decades, because at the end of that red line in the Mediterranean Sea, the ships bringing oil to the canal, to the mouth of the East Med pipeline to be delivered across the Mediterranean, it becomes hugely valuable if this project, major project, goes through. Israel's planning to build small towns, tourist hubs, and hotels and restaurants along the canal. So it's also a competition with China's Belt and Road Initiative, because if China gets the lead on this, they're going to take over a lot of that Suez Canal traffic themselves, because the infrastructure will be so vastly improved and the agreements with countries they're going through. So this is the East Med pipeline from Israel to Cyprus, Greece, on up through Italy. A huge project in and of itself, of course. And we have to dig it, though. What are the problems in digging this? Well, you can't do it without nuclear weapons. So they need, they realized that nuclear weapons could be used for peaceful purposes, and actually excavation. And tests were done to prove that. Yes, there was tritiated water and fallout, but they believed that could be managed. And this is a project that's 50 years old. So maybe it's been managed with new nuclear weapons. Who knows? But every 1,300 feet along this canal, you have to blow up a nuclear weapon. Yeah, it was, I forget how many megatons. But the plans were done for it. It was a classified document, recently declassified. Lawrence Livermore Lab developed all the research for it under the U.S. Department of Energy, and it was declassified in 1993. Strategically valuable alternative to the Suez Canal. That's the conclusion. In other words, this can be done. It might cost you $16 to $55 billion, but it can be done. It'd be a lot less expensive if you could run a route parallel to the Egyptian border, the red line, instead of the yellow line. Excuse me, I'm sorry. The red line is the Egyptian border. The yellow line running parallel to the Egyptian border would be a lot less expensive running through Gaza. Why? Because the Amor rock structure is easier to excavate and does not have the problem of the Suez Canal, where desert storms fill it full of sand every year, and it's just constant 24/7 dredging problem. So they would relieve themselves of the enormous financial burden there if they ran it through Gaza. It would save 50 miles of excavation as well, and a lot of nuclear bombs, for what it's worth. But that wouldn't be acceptable to the world, certainly not the Palestinian Gazan people, absent a catalyzing and catastrophic event like a new Pearl Harbor. Where have we heard that before? So you have an enormously controversial strategy that requires a war trigger that the whole world will understand. Israel has to protect itself from these terrorists at all costs. In times of war, it's best never to focus on emotions or sides, but rather follow the money. So without these geostrategic resources of oil, gas, and shipping lanes, you cannot possibly understand Israel's motivation for destroying, for instance, 80% now of the housing in Gaza. Why would they do that? Their Ministry of Intelligence is recommending what? The forcible and permanent transfer of Gaza Strip's 2.2 million Palestinian residents to Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Wait a minute. What? I thought you were just going after Hamas. This is an official document released for the first time, a 10-page document dated what? October 13th. This is 1 week after that surprise attack. It bears the logo of the intelligence ministry. We're going to look at it. She says it says in this document that her ministry created, massive population migration from combat zones is a natural and necessary result. She actually said that before the attack, by the way, as she was developing this paper before the attack. Obviously, it's publicly stated in 4 days before the attack. So the 10-page document assesses 3 options, by the way, for the future of the Palestinians in the framework of the current war. It recommends a full population transfer as its preferred course of action. It calls on Israel to enlist the international community in support of this endeavor somehow. The document is dated, again, 6 days before the attack. So what do we have? We have this website of the Ministry of Intelligence posting their paper, which you can download right here. There's the website, the actual URL. So here's the paper. It's state officials requiring to bring about significant change in the civilian reality in the Gaza Strip in light of the Hamas crimes that led to the Iron Swords War. Therefore, it must decide on a political objective regarding civilian population. Well, wait a minute. This was issued 1 week. How many hands did this paper have to go through to be approved and issued? It's not going to
Kind of like the Patriot Act.
Yeah, that was ready to roll out a week or two after 9/11. As soon as the anthrax hit Congress, that is. Come back to that. Their preferred option was option C. It would yield long-term positive strategic outcomes for Israel. And it is an executable option. It requires determination from the political echelon in the face of international pressure, with an emphasis on harnessing the support of the United States, who rules the world, you might dream or think, and additional pro-Israeli countries, for as few as they might be, for that endeavor. What does option C say? Due to the fighting against Hamas, there's a need to evacuate the non-combatant population from the combat area. This, by the way, sounds like Theodore Herzl 100 years earlier. It hasn't changed. The strategy has not changed. The goal has not changed. Israel should act to evacuate the civilian population to the Sinai. In the first stage, 10 cities will be established in the area of the Sinai. The next stage includes the establishment of a humanitarian zone to assist the civilian population of Gaza and the construction of cities in resettled areas in northern Sinai. Tent cities, by the way. In the first stage, operations from the air with a focus on the north of Gaza to allow a ground invasion in that area. These are operational. A gradual ground invasion of the territory in the north, along the border until the occupation of the entire strip is in control. And then you enable the evacuation of the civilian population toward Rafah. Well, they did that. And what's happening in Rafah now? Under intense bombing.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't make this stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
Involving significant population displacement may present challenges in terms of international legitimacy. Well, that's the understatement of the year. That's their biggest problem, and they're facing that, of course, now as they're being accused of genocide by South Africa in the court. So the Ministry of Intelligence document says significant population displacement may present challenges. Yeah, the forcible transfer of populations violates Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. It's prosecutable as an international crime. Since the international crimes of Israel during the past 75 years are so well documented, maybe they can get away with this one too. They'll make it happen. They're making it happen despite world opinion and outrage from all over the world. Under the cover of an instigated wider war with their Arab neighbors. That is the false flag trigger that could possibly get this done. It's certainly what they're trying here, as we're showing through these parallels. Under the cover of the regional Six-Day War, after all, which was preemptively started by Israel, an attack on Egypt, it invaded and annexed not only Gaza, but the West Bank too, and therefore occupying all of Palestinian sovereign territory allocated by the 1948 UN plan. And they have managed to keep control of it for the last 57 years. They also annexed the Golan Heights in Syria and the Sinai in Egypt, which was eventually returned. So, the puppet masters are indeed pulling the strings and the puppets are dancing. We've found here that there are indeed geostrategic goals and financial goals of both the U.S. government and Israel prior to their respective major terror attacks and 9/11 and Gaza to have aligned perfectly with the opportunities provided to them by those attacks. So now we can get a sense of a greater perspective here. And we've seen that the U.S. arms industry, the oil and banking and media industry have all benefited enormously. So those international corporations are going to jump on board. Similarly, the territorial goals of Israel seem to be in the process of being met following the attacks of 10/7. Mikhail Shosadovsky, Michelle, of Global Research asks, is the U.S. using Israel for imperial control, or is Israel using the U.S. for its territorial ambitions? Or is it a perfect marriage of both? It's really important to think about. Which brings us to parallel 2 of 20. A rich history of historic and recent provocations and false flag operations. Is there a history of U.S. involvement? Yeah, the Spanish-American War. Remember the Maine? Well, it was not attacked. World War I, the sinking of the Lusitania. The Germans had put notices out saying, hey, in papers, paying for them. Any ship coming in this area, is especially British ships, which we're at war with, are subject to being destroyed. I wouldn't get on this ship if I were you. World War II, Pearl Harbor, the Japanese were provoked by sanctions and an embargo on their oil into attacking. And we knew that attack was coming, we being President of the United States at the time, and allowed it to happen, moving the best ships out of Honolulu. The Vietnam War, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, never happened. It was a total false flag operation admitted by Robert McNamara. Operation Northwoods we talked about. So In our deeper dive on false flag operations, we'll learn how these actually work, and how they manipulate the ire of people, putting them into their fight or flight mode with the amygdala activating in the old brain, if you will.
One of the scenarios in Operation Northwoods was to take a regularly scheduled commercial airliner and take a similar type plane, paint the tail numbers up to resemble that of the commercial airliner, fly it by remote control out over the Caribbean, and by remote control blow it up after sending a tape recorded message saying, "Help, we're being attacked by Cuban MiGs."
That's how it works. And this was approved by General Lyman Limnitzer, brought to Kennedy. Kennedy disapproved it, and for that and a lot of other reasons suffered the consequences of the deep state. We on the Israel side, we have a similar set of triggers. The King David Hotel bombing in 1946, where Benjamin Emanuel, the father of Rahm Emanuel, the Chicago mayor, dressed up like a Palestinian and planted bombs in the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, killing 91 people, injuring 46 as part of Irgun Zvi Leumi. This is not disputed. It's in Wikipedia, the whole thing, as is the Lavon affair, where a group of Egyptian Jews were recruited by Israeli military intelligence to plant bombs inside Egyptian, American, and British-owned civilian targets. The attacks were to be blamed on the Muslim Brotherhood, the Egyptian communists, unspecified malcontents, and local nationalists. This was a plan that was never enacted, but the plan was in detail and exposed. Extremely embarrassing for Israel, as was their exposed attack on the USS Liberty of 1967, the anniversary of which is coming up in 4 days. Geis said, and this is the actual high-level U.S. Air Force, Officer Geis said they launched relief aircraft to the Liberty twice, but were recalled both times by the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. And he challenged that recall. And what did LBJ say, who was on the line? "I don't give a damn if the ship sinks and all the Americans are killed. I will not embarrass my ally." Gives you insight into the relationship between Israel and the United States. Sworn to secrecy for his lifetime, then Admiral Geis, 6th Fleet Carrier Commander, but it came out. An eyewitness account, that is. And we have Israel getting caught really bad here. SOS messages were blocked by Israel. They attacked the antennas first, the communication systems of the ship. One single SOS message got out during this whole time. And as soon as it did, and there was some measure of response, the attack stopped. And it was no accident, former CIA Director Richard Helms said. So he came out and told the truth about it. Another false flag operation in Berlin at the Labelle Discotheque. Ostrovsky, this author, charges that Mossad had framed Libya in the April 5th, 86 bombing. The Mossad had broadcast fraudulent orders for terrorist attacks to Libyan embassies around the world. Although the orders were rejected as false by the Spanish and French intelligence service, they were picked up and accepted as real by the U.S. intelligence. As a consequence, Libya was blamed for this attack and bombed badly by Ronald Reagan. So we have this string of Israeli attacks and embedded intelligence officers that were caught, like Benjamin Ephraim, captured ISIS Libya commander. It turns out to be a Mossad operative and running an ISIS unit. Well, it turns out that ISIS in and of itself, well, the whole thing was created by U.S. and Israeli intelligence. Saudi intelligence probably too. So the Israeli ex-IDF chief acknowledges we've supplied ISIS, Al-Qaeda, FSA with weapons and funding for years.
In a shocking change of policy, now former IDF Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot revealed on Sunday to the British Sunday Times newspaper that Israel has indeed been supplying weapons and funding to Syrian rebel groups in the Golan Heights. These claims have been made many times throughout the years, but this is the first time an Israeli official has confirmed such reports, and it came on the same day that Eisenkot admitted responsibility for striking, quote, thousands of targets in Syria as well. Until now, Israel has only ever discussed humanitarian aid shipments and programs like Operation Good Neighbor. Earlier this week, Prime Minister and Defense Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also broke with Israel's tradition of ambiguity in Syria by adding to Eisenkot's comments. He confirmed not only that Israel carried out hundreds of attacks against Iranian and Hezbollah targets, but also that Israel struck Damascus International Airport last weekend. A break from policy that at the time was considered just a campaign ploy.
So why are they talking about these things relatively recently? Don't know. U.S. troops would enforce a peace treaty under the Army study. This has to do with the Mossad. So there's a 68-page paper put out by the Army School of Advanced Military Studies. And what do they say? Of the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service, the SAMS officers say, wild card, ruthless, and cunning, has capability to target U.S. forces and make it look like a Palestinian Arab act. When was this report put out? One day before 9/11. That's pretty darn interesting. And when you look at some of the evidence that we'll be looking at in this series, we will be seeing that that's actually true. That's what's happening. So there's other provocations. They storm for the first time. They're not allowed on the mosque, the sacred mosque shrine grounds, but they storm it after some hooligans, some teenagers. What do they do once they get there? They go into the mosque and
Palestinians praying in Al-Aqsa Mosque, and Israeli soldiers go in and have a chat to them.
There's no greater provocation. And this created a storm of problems in the country. What is the motto of the Mossad? By way of deception, thou shalt make war. Deception is the key ingredient, of course, in false flag operations. And they are masters at it. They've been doing it for more than 75 years. So we want to look at parallel 3, patsies, politically useful foreign operatives with a history of violence developed by the state through implants, embedded Mossad operatives, for instance. In our case, embedded U.S. intelligence agents in 9/11 in Al-Qaeda, which we developed in the 1980s for use against the Soviets' occupation in Afghanistan. We had very close ties with Osama bin Laden all of those decades. He was called Tim Osman. He was treated in a U.S. hospital before 9/11. I think 4 months before 9/11 in July. We'll talk about all these things, but let's look at James Corbett's introduction of Al Qaeda here. Oh, well, that's where additional information can be found about it, and we'll jump through into. I say what happened. I got confused. So we have Osama bin Laden at large in a cave for a decade, eluding the most technologically advanced military intelligence in the world. hidden terrorists throughout the U.S. That could do massive damage. Indeed, the FBI infiltrating some of these terrorists were found to have been instigating them, giving them everything they need to go create a problem, and then arresting them, usually before the problem ever exists, so saying, look, we saved you. So yet another example of false flag operations post 9/11. And bin Laden's treated for a kidney infection at the Dubai hospital, and on July 4th, actually. This is pretty darn important because he underwent treatment at the American hospital here. He met with a CIA agent, citing an unnamed source at the hospital. The report says the suspected terrorist arrived in Dubai on July 4th by air from Quetta, Pakistan, and was taken immediately to the hospital for kidney treatment because he had quite a problem with his kidneys. He needed dialysis. During his stay, he allegedly met an unidentified top CIA official, probably the station chief from Saudi Arabia, is what this gentleman thinks. So bin Laden was accompanied by a doctor, bodyguards, and nurse. The point of all of that detail is to suggest that the CIA denies all of this, of course. The hospital denies it. You can't find any more proof of it than this gentleman's leak to the French press. Covered in the top newspaper, the second top newspaper in France. So, and elsewhere. Mike Rupert documents this very well also, and also in Provincia in that document. So bin Laden consistently denied responsibility for 9/11. Why would a proud terrorist deny responsibility? We'll actually look at his statements here, but he says, I've already said that I'm not involved in the 11 September attacks in the United States. As a Muslim, I try my best to avoid telling a lie. Neither had I any knowledge of these attacks, nor do I consider the killing of innocent women, children, and other human beings as an acceptable act. That doesn't sound like the terrorist we all come to know and love, being facetious. And he again said, I've already said that we are against the American system, not against its people. Whereas in these attacks, the common American people have been killed. It's very interesting. The United States should try to trace the perpetrators of these attacks within itself, the people who are part of the U.S. system. In other words, he's exposing the false flag event here. Another one being the deadly anthrax letters hidden in the letter attacks of September 16th. 5 days after 9/11, these letter attacks come out. So, again, politically useful foreign operatives developed by the state. Ex-FBI agents accuse top CIA FBI officials of the 9/11 cover-up. This is pretty darn interesting. Canistraro comes out and exposes a whole web of Saudi intelligence taking care of operatives who were later said to be on the planes as hijackers and funding them, taking care of them. And he's obviously Saudi intelligence, which feeds directly into the current lawsuit between the family members and the Saudi government. J. Michael Springman exposing the whole history of our relationship with Al-Qaeda and our development of them through the 80s. As many as 35,000 Arab Afghans may have received military training in Pakistan at a cost of $800 million in the years leading up to 1988.
Richard, I'm going to intercede and make a statement here too. A friend of mine, Dennis Young, who is a Canadian, who was part of the NATO effort in the Balkans was actually involved in there and saw personally, firsthand, the CIA brought in Al Qaeda and were training them in Bosnia as terrorists.
Wow.
Yeah, he saw this himself, and he did a program with me, several of them actually, but one not long ago talking about that because it was amazing. They had them housed in a school, and they were actually in the process of training them. They brought them into Bosnia to be part of a training while there was a war going on.
Incredible.
Yeah.
These are very useful foreign operatives with a history of violence developed by the state.
By the state. And he was Canadian military. He was there in the military, in Canadian military intelligence at the time that this happened. And he said, I saw it firsthand. I saw what they were doing.
Incredible.
That was, I believe, I'm going to say it was 1996. It was during the Bosnian War.
Okay, well, to Gaza, we got to ask ourselves, where did Hamas come from? Ron Paul is credited with exposing some of this in Congress.
If you look at the history, you'll find out that Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat. And you said, well, yeah, that was better then and served its purpose, but we didn't want Hamas to do this. So then we as Americans say, well, we have such a good system, we're going to impose this on the world. We're going to invade Iraq and teach people how to be Democrats. We want free elections. So we encourage the Palestinians to have a free election. They do, and they elect Hamas. So we first, indirectly and directly through Israel, help establish Hamas. Then we have an election. Then Hamas becomes dominant, so we have to kill them. You know,
that's a very important set of statements there, and it's proven. Even Avi Primor, ambassador to Israel. So how did this happen? Well, the Wall Street Journal exposes this back in 2009. Yeah. The Prime Minister Netanyahu confirmed his alliance with Hamas in a recorded statement to the Likud Party Knesset members. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state, because they were all against the two-state solution, has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank. Divide and conquer. They're the favorite thing to do over there.
Well, and look at the date of that, Richard. It's October 9th, a couple of days after the event.
Well, this is the article. The statement goes back way before that.
I see.
He wouldn't have said this after. No, that would be way too obvious. Yeah, it's many, many years old, that statement.
Okay.
And The Intercept says, blowback, how Israel went from helping create Hamas to bombing it. They created a Frankenstein, as Ron Paul alluded to. Netanyahu propped up for years Hamas. This is in the times of Israel. This is not just Gentile anti-Semitic tripe. It is very, very well known. It's blown up in our faces. And now it's blown up in our faces. In fact,
it was the same rebels, and it was all Western funded. It's interesting that through the ISIS, or the ISIL and ISIS invasions of the Middle East, we were told this was the Islamic State.
Max
in the
Egan.
Levant and the Islamic State in Syria, ISIL and ISIS. Told that these were Muslim extremists trying to convert the world to Sharia. Well, what they did was go out and completely destabilize the region. They destroyed every piece of Muslim infrastructure that they could find. Ancient Aleppo, they turned it into absolute ruins. They bombed and destroyed Palmyra. They bombed and destroyed every Muslim temple they could find. They bombed and destroyed every Muslim artifact and anything they could find that was Muslim through the whole area. Does that sound like the act of Muslims? They were also apparently set up through the entire region where there is a pipeline running to Israel. Now, if these are Muslim extremists, then obviously their biggest enemy is Israel, isn't it? That's what we've been told. That's what the media always tells us. These terrible Muslims want to destroy Israel. And here we have this group of apparently Muslim extremists rampaging through the Middle East, called the Islamic State in the Levant, the Islamic State in Syria. And they're rampaging through all these places, and they are destroying every single piece of Muslim infrastructure they can find. And where they're doing it, there is a huge pipeline running to Israel, supplying them with all of their fuel, and they just happen to leave this alone completely. And again, if there's this huge force big enough to take on Syria, why haven't they ever attacked Israel?
So, again, the bad guys are being used here, if not created, ISIS altogether, artificially, by these interests. So let's look at parallel 4, a triggering event with an innovative attack, dubious origins, a manufactured invasion with foreign operatives. In the U.S., for instance, 19 fundamentalist hijackers hijacked 4 planes penetrating the most highly defended airspace in the world and used them as flying bombs at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. These hijackers failed Cessna flying school. And they were obviously not dedicated Muslims, because many of them are found drinking, doing cocaine, and hanging out with strippers. So a real dichotomy that's easily exposed in many of the writings in the 9/11 movement. On the Israeli side, we have hundreds of Hamas, on the Gaza side, hundreds of Hamas soldiers penetrating the most highly secure border in the world, literally, by air, penetrating by sea, penetrating by also land, and proceeding to kill and kidnap hundreds of Israelis. The narrative is that this is a huge surprise. We'll look at the surprise, how huge it may not have been. 1,000 Hamas terrorists, but according to the narrative, broke out and crossed the border at 15 separate points. Completely embarrassing the Israeli military, of course. And then we have the Iron Dome. We'll come back to that. In fact, let's come into it right now. The Iron Dome was built to shield Israel from the attacks of what they say were thousands, but all we can see is a few dozen in these videos of rocket attacks. But Dr. Moti Schaefer, the Defense Prize winner in Israel, an aerospace engineering expert, stated simply that the Iron Dome was one of the biggest bluffs ever seen. Well, wait a minute. They paid billions of dollars for this. Doesn't it work? There's no missile in the world today able to intercept missiles or rockets. Iron Dome is a sound and light show that is intercepting only Israeli public opinion and itself, of course. Actually, all the explosions you see in the sky are self-explosions. No Iron Dome missile has ever collided with a single rocket. The rockets announced as intercepted by Iron Dome either never reach the ground or are virtual rockets invented and destroyed on the Iron Dome control computer. Well, this is quite a statement. I have no way to verify it. But if you think about it, it's a lot less expensive to build a false system which keeps your population in fear because, oh no, more rockets are coming in. Well, you can't see them. You can say they're coming in. You can say you're shooting them down. You can set off a few of them so that they do come down, and you can see that they don't do much damage. These Hamas rockets are capable of killing people if they get within 20, 30 feet of them. So it's something to consider in our parallel search here. We have a catastrophic intelligence failure, parallel number 5. Of course, in the U.S., we had, our air defense has been penetrated by civilian aircraft under the cover of United Airlines, etc., flown by the enemy, who was developed in CIA flight training schools. We have the CIA obstructing the FBI, as Canestraro has pointed out in his landmark exposure down in Guantanamo court hearings. The daily presidential brief even said, bin Laden determined to attack within the United States, ignored. Intelligence warnings from numerous foreign countries, ignored. So this is part of the idea, right? You have to make it look like you were completely surprised by all of this. 9/11, we have ignored intelligence warnings. The CIA, FBI ignoring intelligence, the presidential brief. So we have ex-FBI agents. I'll put that.
Incidentally, Richard, NORAD on 9/11 was told to completely stand down. It was the only time in U.S. history since the NORAD was formed, the North American Air Defense Command, and their fighter aircraft are told to stand down the day of 9/11.
That's absolutely correct, and there's 41 separate exercises, and we're going to breeze through them when we get to the stand down, a military stand down parallel, probably the next one. On the Gaza side, we have the IDF ignoring the 40-page playbook, which they had a year before Hamas executed their plan. They had the plan. They said, oh, well, we didn't think that they would actually do it. I mean, it gets amazing, the things they say when they're caught. So despite Israeli intelligence warnings about a Hamas attack, the army did not evacuate the Nova festival. Top defense officials held urgent consultations when? The night before the October 7th events about a possible Hamas attack. But no one in the IDF notified the Nova festival organizers or the party goers, hundreds of whom were mown down for 9 hours. No one came to save them. Mm-hmm. And yet they had these urgent meetings throughout the morning, late morning of the night before, into the late morning. So again, obviously a false light. They had to have victims. Without victims, Israeli victims, Jews being victimized, killed, beaten, raped, tortured, beheaded, you don't have a catastrophic emotional imperative to go down and do what needs to be done in Gaza. This is all backed up very well in terms of not what they were doing and not alerting the festival goers or the rest of the army, by the way. Mm-hmm. The army had a huge stand down, as we'll see also. And looking at Hamas, it train its air force under the nose of the Mossad, the most highly surveilled strip of land in the world. And they're training with ultralights. It's just not going to happen. And the Egypt intelligence officials warned Israel, something big is happening from Hamas, because we have intelligence in Hamas. If you don't, we certainly do, but it was all ignored. So we have no detection of future imminent or presently occurring Hamas attacks at 15 different sites, even though it was a year in planning, with mock building complexes outdoors under the eye of Israeli satellite surveillance, even though the IDF infiltrated Hamas thoroughly. So it still happens. Yoram Erez of the Kerem Shalom Battalion. I happen to know how things work in Gaza and on the border. I was the commander of the Kerem Shalom sector. I was in charge of the Kasuf sector. I know the perimeter fence very well. I know how the army works there. I was in the Shati refugee camp in Gaza. I was in charge of the Jabalia refugee camp. I would make ambushes on the fence and deep in the area. I met Gazans, ate and breathed Gaza. So he says the obstacle is built so that even a fox cannot pass it. They let it happen. The Hamas attack was allowed to close the book on Palestine. This is really relevant from these key insiders who decide at some point to tell the truth. So they have 3 levels of pressure alerts on the fence, and it alerts wherever it's cut. There are 24/7 forces that are responsible for arriving when? Within minutes, not hours, certainly not 7 hours, to the point where there's an alert in the fence. They say, oh, well, the Iranians are so sophisticated that they took out our alert system. Well, when an alert system is taken out, you know it, and you respond in force physically at the time. And this point has been made by many insiders as well. The female observers are champions in identification. They do at least one penetration practice every day. Observation scattered along the border cover every inch of it. They detect movement even before it even approaches the obstacle, day and night. Every day before dawn, there's a dawn alert procedure. All this hour, all the forces are awake. In this case, also the hour when the hundreds of terrorists entered Israel, too, by the way. The night shift alternates with the day shift. The commander of each force inspects the axis to make sure there were no infiltrations during the night. Trackers that move on the axis now know how to recognize traces. They know how to cross the fence, how much even when. There's several layers of security. This is not the place to talk about it. So some of that's classified, apparently. The above report first showed up in browsers on October 12th or 13th, the week after 10/7. But this one is harder to source, but by its specific nature, it's easy to conclude that it's authentic. So how the hell does a Palestinian tractor move towards the fence without anyone reacted to it? How did the tractor manage to sabotage the fence for a long hour and open access to Israel without anyone reacting? How did hundreds of terrorist civilians cross the border without anyone lifting a finger? How did the terrorists arrive on foot in vehicles armed from head to toe to dozens of Israeli settlements without any reaction from our side? How did hundreds of terrorists stay in Israel territory for long hours, shoot hundreds of Israelis, loot the property without there being even a single reaction on our side? How did this happen? Surprising officers when they were not ready and kidnapping them to take them to Gaza. How was one bullet not fired? How did this happen under our noses? Where did an entire division go? Where did 3 brigades go? Who swallowed 9 battalions? Where did an entire regular infantry brigade go that usually outnumbers the elite? Where did thousands of soldiers go? Well, this intelligence officer has questions too. Listen, I served in the Gaza division. Throughout my service, I was in the logistics support. During the 2014 Gaza war, the Gaza division, listen to me well. There's no way in the world that anyone can approach the border without us knowing about it. The observers sit in bunkers. 4 hours. They can't move their eyes side to side. They sit in front of a screen. No way in hell. They would wake up at night for a pigeon, for a stork that got too close to the border, for a cockroach that went under the border. They would roust how could they enter with tractors? How could 400 men, no one saw it coming. So there's several of these intelligence workers, including
Israel is
this gentleman.
Probably the most advanced surveillance state in the world, and the Gaza border is probably the most heavily surveilled. And the Shabak somehow didn't know about this massive attack planned by thousands of random Gazans on pickup trucks and hang gliders. Are you serious? There's the theory that they're called in Hebrew Tatzpitanot, which is basically the command and control center. These are the people, mostly females, who who's tasked with observing the Gaza border fence. They say there's a theory that says they blew it up before they blew up the equipment that surveilled. The fence was breached in 15 different locations. And you want to tell me that the most highly advanced surveillance equipment on arguably any border in the world didn't pick that up, didn't report it? Well, they did, and it's documented. So don't believe that lie. Now, once thousands of Gazans on pickup trucks and hang gliders invaded Israel, which apparently no one knew about, they had 7 hours to kill everyone in their path, completely destroy kibbutzim. Not only that, take hostages back to Gaza, unscathed, unopposed. Do you know how long it takes an attack helicopter to get activated and blow up any one of those tractors or pickup trucks or hang gliders that invaded Israel? Less than 5 minutes. And I know all these things firsthand because I served on the Gaza border.
He served on the Gaza border, and he's telling his truth, which is not something that he's going to emerge from without at least a lot of pressure, if not retribution. And here's another commander. We'll blow past him because we don't have time. We have former CIA intelligence officer Philip Giraldi. I find it impossible to believe that Israel did not have multiple informants inside Gaza. They formed Gaza, after all. That's my comment, as well as electronic listening devices all along the borders. They let it happen so they can wipe Gaza off the map. That's his conclusion. And we jump to parallel 6, a military stand down. Here we go, Dan. No military response in the U.S. until when? After the last plane hit its target. That was the Pentagon. Mm-hmm. Most unusually, not one of them, the 4 planes, were shot down. Not even at the most highly defended building in the world, the Pentagon, when they knew it was coming. When Dick Cheney was being asked by his aide, do the orders still stand, sir? Mm-hmm. When the plane was 10 miles out, 5 miles out, getting closer and closer. Do the orders still stand? He said, of course the orders still stand. Have I given you any reason to the contrary? Well, what were the orders? They could only have been to allow the plane through because that's what happened. In other words, to not shoot it down. That's the conclusion of most 9/11 researchers. But there were no less than 40 air drills, most of which occurred on the day of 9/11. simulating hijacked airliners, many of them, flying them into buildings. Some of them in New York, some of them in D.C. Vigilant Guardian, Global Guardian were among these. Some of them had Osama bin Laden on the cover, so he's not a surprise. Some of them targeted the North Tower, so that's obviously not a surprise. And Condoleezza Rice says, nobody could have imagined hijacking a plane and running it into a building. Well, this exercise did just that. It was imagined. We have no detection of, as they mentioned, 20, some people say 15, some people say 20 border incursions and for 7 hours, and ignoring Egyptian intelligence. And we have inside confidential sources, Rabbi Chananya Weissman, for instance.
You won't believe what a Jewish charity leader told me today.
We're friendly with several good people in Israel. One is Rabbi Hanania Weissman. He knows a lot of people in Israel. He knows confidential sources that he shared with us their information about the stand-down order. He sent out a missive that, indeed, the IDF was given stand-down orders, both the Army and the Air Force.
There's the actual missive.
7 hours to stand down while those attacks took place. And this allowed the terrorists to come in and begin slaughtering and torturing the citizens.
This is inside information. You didn't see this on CNN, did you? You didn't see it anywhere, probably, because I had to dig deep to find it. That's the missive. Who's it from? Rabbi Chananya Weissman. It's authentic. It's got the date, the time of the email. He's talking about the various components of security that were part of the stand down. Well, he's probably hearing it from whoever told him this also. Parallel 7, foreknowledge of the attacks. We have lots of foreknowledge. In fact, the planning for a major biochemical attack drill on nearby Pier 92 near the World Trade Center called Tripod 2. Hundreds of FEMA, police department, fire department, FBI, military personnel all ready to go the day before 9/11. When 9/11 happened, they took over the emergency management